Good morning and welcome to the worship service of the Unitarian Universalist Church in Idaho Falls. My name is Arthur Cole, today's worship associate. This morning we bid you welcome, who come with a weary spirit seeking rest, who come with troubles that are too much with you, who come afraid and hurt. We bid you welcome, who come with hope in your heart, who come with anticipation in your step, who come proud and joyous. We bid you welcome, who enter this virtual space as a homecoming, who have found here room for your spirit, who find in this people a family. Whoever you are, whatever you are, wherever you are on your journey, we bid you welcome. We hope that you will experience this service as a moment that inspires you, find a message that transforms you, and although virtual at this time, a caring and loving community that gives meaning to your life. We have at least one announcement, and that is that virtual services will continue at least for the next 2 weeks. Because of COVID, of course. Vic, do we have any other announcement at this point?
Nope.
None. Okay. Please note that if you have joys, concerns, sorrows, and milestones that affected your life in the recent past, and that you would like to share with the congregation, you can do so by posting them in the chat box on the right of the screen. We also invite you to join our virtual coffee hour after the worship service by clicking on the link provided in the email inviting you to today's worship service. We will not have a dedicated time for an offering this morning, but encourage you to sustain and strengthen this church by making a contribution, either by mailing a check to the church at P.O. Box 50376 in Idaho Falls, Idaho 83405, or by going to the church's website at idahofallsuu.org. In the Connections menu, click on Donate to get to the contributions page. Thank you. I invite you now to enter into the spirit of worship with the following words. May we be reminded here of our highest aspirations and inspired to bring our gifts of love and service to the altar of humanity. May we know once again that we are not isolated beings but connected in mystery and miracle to the universe, to this community, and to each other. Please join me in reading the Church's covenant, which is printed in the order of service. Love is the spirit of this community, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. We will now light our chalice with the following words. Symbol of light and knowledge, symbol of warmth and freedom, we light this chalice as a symbol of our faith. Here we gather to celebrate hope and the infinite possibilities of love.
Good morning. Our call to worship this morning is an autumn prayer by Edward Hayes. O sacred season of autumn, be my teacher, for I wish to learn the virtue of contentment. As I gaze upon your full-colored beauty, I sense all about you an at-homeness with your amber riches. You are the season of retirement, of full barns and harvested fields. The cycle of growth has ceased, and the busy work of giving life is now completed. I sense in you no regrets. You've lived a full life. I live in a society that is an ever restless, always eager for mountains to climb, seeking happiness through more and more possessions. As a child of my culture, I am seldom truly at peace with what I have. Teach me to take stock of what I have given and received. May I know that it is enough, that my striving can cease in the abundance of life's grace. May I know the contentment that allows the totality of my energies to come to full flower. May I know that, like you, I am rich beyond measure. As you, O autumn, take pleasure in your great bounty, let me also take delight in the abundance of the simple things in life, which are truly the source of joy. With the golden glow of peaceful contentment, may I truly appreciate this autumn day. As we sing our hymns this morning, you'll notice that Jessica's beautiful voice will be absent. Her throat was bothering this week, and so she recorded them instrumental only, and we wish her a speedy recovery, and she'll be back with us singing again soon, I hope. So now I invite you to join in hymn number 52, In Sweet Fields of Autumn.
for all ages is The Amazing Serpent Shadow of Chichen Itza, as found on the Kids Discover website, read by Elizabeth Coyote, Director of Lifespan Faith Development. As the Earth orbits annually around the Sun, its axis changes direction, which is what makes the days grow shorter in winter and longer in summer when you are north of the equator. This axial shift creates 4 events that divide the year into 91-day-long quarters. The winter solstice, the shortest day of the year, the vernal or spring equinox, when night and day are of equal length, the summer solstice, the longest day of the year, and the autumnal equinox, when night and day are again of equal length. Ancient peoples may not have known how the Earth's axis moves as we orbit the Sun, but they were fascinated by the effects of this movement. Some devised ceremonial and agricultural calendars based on their observations, and some even built monuments that celebrated the annual cycle and its 4 important days. Such sites are found at England's Stonehenge, Cambodia's Angkor Wat, Guatemala's Tikal, and other places. You can visit one of the more dramatic equinox-inspired sites at Mexico's Chichen Itza, the remains of a large Mayan city that flourished from 750 to 1200 CE. The most prominent of Chichen Itza's temples and arcades is the Temple of Kukulkan, which is named for a Mayan serpent god. Each of its 4 sides has 91 very steep steps, and the top platform forms the 365th step. It's like the whole building is a calendar. The entire stepped pyramid is composed of 9 larger steps, and twice a year on the spring and autumnal equinoxes, the sun sets on just the right arc in the sky to cast a shadow of the pyramid's edge onto the railing of the northern staircase. That shadow creeps down the staircase's edge until it connects to a stone statue of a snake's head, the head of Kukulkan, that sits at the bottom of the staircase with his fangs bared. When the shadow and the head connect, it looks like a huge diamondback snake is perched on the side of the temple. This phenomenon is also visible for a few weeks before and after the equinoxes, but it's most dramatic on the equinoxes. The end.
We now dedicate time to our joys, concerns, sorrows, and milestones, a time to share with this religious community events that have affected your life in the recent past, and to speak out for those we want to hold in our thoughts. We received one from Leila Chambers about Anita Carpenter has a very bad respiratory infection, not COVID-19, but just something with the lungs. She was taken to Ermac early Friday morning because she couldn't breathe. The diagnosis is pneumonia. So it has greatly improved in the meantime, and hopefully she will be back home on Tuesday. Vic, do we have any other?
Just a note from Dennis Jorgensen. He says, I have lots of veggies that are going to freeze tonight, if anyone is interested. So Dennis is giving away veggies.
Thank you, Dennis. We light one last candle to lift up these joys and concerns, as well as the ones that remain in the silence of our hearts.
I invite you now to enjoy a short video about the sunlight serpent on the equinox at Chichen Itza.
The role of the astronomers in the Mesoamerican societies was quite considerable, and we do have clear evidence that astronomers were involved in the planning of monumental buildings as well. Orientations in Mesoamerica concentrate at the solstice and at the days very close to the equinoxes, marking quarter days of the year, midpoints in time between the solstices. Moreover, the intervals separating sunrise and sunset dates, recorded by orientations, tend to be multiples of 13 and 20 days. The urban layouts are skewed clockwise from cardinal directions by an amount usually close to 17, a tradition originated at Teotihuacan and probably indicating an interest in the sun rising in autumn and/or setting in spring. As an example of what the Mesoamerican architects were able to realize, we shall visit today a famous post-classic Maya town of the Yucatan. The Yucatan Peninsula is dotted with peculiar natural features called cenotes. A cenote is a sinkhole which results from the collapse of the bedrock surface and is usually filled by groundwater. Cenotes were considered sacred by the Mayas, who used them as gateways of spiritual communication with the other world and, as a consequence, cast sacrificial offerings, including humans, into them. It is probably on account of the presence of the two imposing cenotes that Chichen Itza was founded. Around the 10th century AD, it became one of the most important cities of the Maya world. The architecture of Chichen Itza is famous for many items, including a huge ball court, the biggest of the Maya world, and the so-called caracol, an enormous structure with circular layout built over a huge platform. From the outside, it resembles an astronomical observatory covered by a domed vault, but the dome is actually almost filled in, apart from a spiral passage that gives the building its name. Caracol means snail in Spanish. There are many particular features of the edifice which are likely to correspond to intended astronomical alignments, but we cannot be sure that astronomical observations were really carried out from here. In any case, the interest in astronomy by the builders of Chichen Itza is apparent when we move to the most impressive of its monuments, the world-famous pyramid usually called Castillo. It is a square building, 24 meters tall, and each side is fitted with a staircase which reaches the temple on the summit. The monument is dedicated to Kukulkan, the plummet serpent, a very ancient divinity in Mesoamerican religion. Two monolithic sculptures of the serpent's head are placed on each side of one of the staircases. Clearly, this is the most important one as it leads to the main entrance on the summit. The building incorporates an older pyramid with its summit temple still intact, containing a chakmol, a statue with a recumbent man which was used for human sacrifice, and a jaguar-shaped throne. Temples were usually overbuilt in calendrical occasions, for instance the occurrence of calendar round dates, and indeed the relationship of the monument with calendrics is very strong. First of all, observe that the square base is skewed 22 degrees clockwise with respect to the cardinal directions. By analyzing the motion of the sun at Chichen Itza, it can be easily verified that in this way the azimuth of the facade, which points to the north or west, fits remarkably well with the setting of the sun on the days of the zenith passages, at this latitude the 20th of May and the 24th of July. The interest in the passage of the sun at the zenith is, on the other hand, very well documented in Mesoamerica. It was studied with appropriate devices that enabled astronomers to recognize the transit of the sun directly overhead. But the most striking astronomical aspect still awaits us. The Castillo was in fact designed as a three-dimensional astronomical device, and these features makes this wonderful monument quite unique. To understand how this device works, let us observe that, in general, the shadow produced by the northwest corner of the pyramid in the afternoon will be projected onto the northeast face in different ways on different days and at different hours. Generally speaking, the corresponding staircase, the one bearing the serpent heads, could either be in shadow or illuminated. Only as a result of the very special positions of the sun, and therefore on special days and hours, it will be half illuminated, that is to say, the undulating profile of the corner will project an undulating figure onto it. When this occurs, a light and shadow effect connects with the serpent head at the base, creating the image of the descent of a giant snake. The monument has been designed in such a way that this phenomenon takes place, reaching its maximum about 1 hour before sunset in the days close to the equinoxes. It was, however, certainly meant to be seen at or near the spring equinox in March, as September is in full rainy season, while March marks the arrival of it. This calendrical function is therefore clearly symbolic. The serpent descends the Castillo stairway as a harbinger of the rainy season. Where is he going? The direction indicated by the stairway where the hierophany occurs crosses another monument of the esplanade, the so-called Venus platform. Nearby starts a sakbe, a ceremonial causeway, which today can still be run up to the largest of the Chichen Itza cenotes, the so-called Well of the Sacrifice. The sacred water here is thus the final destination of the god. This appointment, fixed by the Maya 1,000 years ago, was forgotten and only rediscovered in the first half of the last century. Nowadays, thousands of people gather each year at Chichen Itza to see it.
About 4.5 billion years ago, when our Earth was very young, the space around the sun was a lot more crowded with large and small chunks of rock and dust, some of which were large enough to be called protoplanets, bodies the size of Mars that ultimately did not survive to become planets on their own. During this period that astronomers call the late heavy bombardment, the planets we see today experienced a series of collisions, typically swallowing up the smaller objects, but occasionally colliding in cataclysmic splendor. It is believed that one such collision the Earth experienced involved a Mars-sized protoplanet that has been given the name Theia. Theia collided with the Earth at an oblique angle, ejecting the matter which would eventually coalesce to form our moon, and tilting the Earth's axis of rotation. You would not have wanted to be on Earth when this happened. And if you're up on your Greek mythology, you'll recognize that Theia was the Titan who gave birth to the moon goddess Selene, hence the name. We can only imagine what this event might have looked like, or perhaps Hollywood CGI artists could produce an approximation. But one thing we can be certain about is that we should offer a prayer of thanksgiving for Theia's spectacular misfortune. For were it not for this cosmic event billions of years ago, there would be no seasons on Earth, and life here may never have evolved. And even if life had evolved, it is doubtful that we would have the wonderful diversity we see today, including our own human species' presence in the web of life. As the neuroscientist Russell Foster writes in his book Seasons of Life, the boom and bust of the seasons has produced much more variation in animal and plant life, resulting in much more complex ecosystems. Without seasons, there would be fewer species with much less diversity in form and behavior. It is also possible that life would not exist at all, As we have a huge diversity of life forms, there has always been some form of life that has been able to bounce back after major extinction events. Foster also notes that the seasons have even helped shape human history. In Europe, for example, the seasons created variation in the availability of resources and the need for trade, which led to war to control the trade. This, too, is a legacy of those early celestial collisions. As our ancient ancestors moved north out of Africa into Europe and Asia and into the Americas ultimately, understanding the seasons became increasingly important. To survive meant understanding the annual cycles and behaviors of wildlife and when plants were ready to be gathered. Then about 10,000 years ago, and possibly as early as 23,000 years ago, came the development of agriculture, which meant the domestication of plants and animals and the establishment of more permanent settlements. And this required an even greater understanding of the cycle of the seasons. Knowing the optimal time to plant crops could mean the difference between life and death. Ancient peoples were keen observers of the heavens, and in cultures around the world, the annual cycle of the sun was observed and noted, with 4 main events dividing the year: the summer and winter solstices, which mark the longest and shortest days of the year, and the fall and spring equinoxes, which mark the days on which the sun appears to traverse the imaginary celestial equator, and the length of night and day are roughly equal. In the northern hemisphere, the spring equinox marks the end of winter and the beginning of the time to plant crops. And the fall equinox marks the end of summer and the time for harvest. In the southern hemisphere, these are, of course, reversed. Since the length of night and day varies more dramatically throughout the year, the further you travel toward the poles away from the equator, the exact time of the equinoxes also varies. This year, here in Idaho, the fall equinox will occur on Wednesday afternoon, September 22nd, at 1:20 p.m. local time. Given their importance to human activities, it seems only natural that religious festivals and rituals would emerge to celebrate these solar milestones, despite differences in cultures and belief systems. No matter how elaborate the spiritual cosmology of a culture became through human creativity, we have always shared the same earth, and she has continued her annual journey around the sun with clockwork regularity. Over the course of thousands of years, temples, hinges, and other structures were built based on precise astronomical observations to create sacred locations to celebrate the seasons. Often the knowledge about the heavens would be closely held by a priestly astronomer class. But when it came time for rituals and festivals, it was often that the whole tribe participated in the celebration. Crowds would anxiously await the sun to rise and shine precisely on a stone or wooden marker, or through the openings in a sacred structure. Even today, there is something magical about such events, even if most of us no longer embrace the spiritual cosmology behind these sacred sites. It is still common for thousands of people to travel to places like Chichen Itza on the equinox to watch the sunlight serpent Kukulkan descend the Great Pyramid, or to gather at Stonehenge to watch the sunrise. And for more intrepid travelers, in the Incan city of Machu Picchu in Peru, there's a stone pillar called Intihuatana, which means the place where the sun gets tied. On the equinoxes, the sun's shadow cast by the pillar disappears. And there are many other such sites scattered around the world. The precise architecture of these ancient sites is truly amazing. I can only imagine the mystical power the ancient peoples felt. Though the September equinox generally marks the time of harvest, depending on the particular location of a people and the types of crops they farmed, the timing of the harvest and associated festivals could vary somewhat. You see some harvest festivals as early as late July or early August. In North America, for example, Native American tribes continue to celebrate the green corn ceremony around this time. And the ancient European pagan holiday Lammas Day, or Loaf Mass Day, is observed on August 1st. Like many old pagan holidays, Lammas is now a Christian holy day, and the special loaves of bread baked to honor the first fruits of the harvest are now used for a communion ritual. For Jews, the festival of Sukkot is celebrated in September, or sometimes October, being a movable holiday like Easter. Sukkot is both a harvest festival to celebrate the bounty of God's providence in the present and the commemoration of his protection during the Exodus. Because of the dual meaning of the holiday in the Torah, it is referred to by two names, Chag HaAsif, which means Festival of Ingathering or Harvest Festival, and Chag HaSukkot, which means the Festival of Booths. Its origins are likely much older, though, since it shares several characteristics with older Canaanite harvest festivals. Jewish families celebrate the holiday by constructing a small temporary shelter or booth called a sukkah near their home, usually from natural materials. They share meals together during the 7 days of this holiday in these shelters. The shelters symbolize the temporary dwellings of the Jewish people while they wandered in Sinai during the Exodus story. This year's Sukkot begins tomorrow on September 20th and ends on September 27th. Coincidentally, tomorrow is also the time of the so-called harvest moon, which, as the name suggests, is associated with the harvest season. The harvest moon is the full moon closest to the fall equinox, and for a few days at this time of year, moonrise begins shortly after sunset, giving farmers a few more hours of additional light to gather their harvest. There are many other harvest festivals that celebrate the season and the bounty of the earth, and they can be fun festivals that bring us joy, or deeply religious occasions, or often a combination of both. In Magione, Italy, for example, there is the annual Olivigando festival in November, which celebrates the olive harvest, something locals have done for thousands of years, long before Christianity, and now it coincides with the feast of St. Clement. Meanwhile, in America, there are county and state fairs across the land in the fall, which often include livestock and agricultural contests. And of course, at the end of November, we have Thanksgiving, which commemorates an impromptu sharing of a harvest feast between the Pilgrims and the native Wampanoag people. Although the story of the first Thanksgiving and the relationship between the Pilgrims and their Native American neighbors has become mythically sanitized since those fall days in 1621, we have records of the feast and should appreciate just how thankful the Pilgrims would have been. Since landing a year earlier, many pilgrims had succumbed to starvation and disease. So it is easy to imagine that the bounty of the first successful crops and the wild game and seafood at the feast would have made for a thankful and joyous occasion indeed. Some festivals around the fall equinox are spiritual observances of the battle between the light and the dark, between the warmth of summer and the cold of winter, even cosmic battles of our imagination brought down to earth for human comprehension. Others are primarily celebrations of the food of the earth, the God or the gods provides for our sustenance. The common thread, which may not even occur to some in the middle of the revelry, is that all of these festivals are ultimately a celebration of our inextricable connection to the earth and the sun, and our utter dependence on both for life. They also remind us about our own cycle of life from birth to death. The ancients quickly recognized the importance of the seasons and the solar calendar. And though our religious traditions have evolved to include lots of holidays to commemorate important figures and events, often intentionally timed to coincide with the more ancient solar holidays, it seems to me that the natural solar holidays would be something we Unitarian Universalists should embrace no matter what theological or spiritual path we are on. Whether our spirituality is rooted in scientific naturalism, some form of neo-paganism, or something more traditional, our affirmation of the interdependent web of all existence permeates our faith. Climate change and other environmental challenges are awakening humanity to the reality of our dependence on Earth, and how fragile our agriculture can be in the face of droughts, floods, and other natural disasters. Reconnecting with the cycles of the year by celebrating the solar holidays can help us deepen our appreciation of the Earth-human relationship, and even have a little fun in the process. We can use these holidays as a time to express our gratitude for life and reflect on our own journey. In the fall, we can acknowledge the quieting of the season and allow ourselves time for rest. Each trip around the sun is a blessing. When we can be safely together again, I welcome the chance to get outside and celebrate the solstices and equinoxes like countless generations before us. Maybe we can build a bonfire or two, or sing songs in the night, or greet the dawn, or just share a festive meal to enjoy the fruits of the harvest. Maybe someday someone will build a Stonehenge on the Snake River Plain, and we can gather there. But in the meantime, watching the sunrise over the Tetons is a pretty good substitute. So on the eve of the fall equinox, being mindful of the harvest and our relationship with Earth, I want to close with an old Unitarian table grace that we have often used in our family. The food which we are about to eat is earth, water, and sun compounded through the alchemy of many plants. Therefore, earth, water, and sun will become part of us. This food is also the fruit of the labor of many beings and creatures. We are grateful for it. May it give us strength, health, joy, and may it increase our love. Amen. I invite you now to join in our closing hymn, number 69, Give Thanks. Our closing words of the poem Harvest by John Charles McNeill. Cows in the stall and sheep in the fold, clouds in the west, deep crimson and gold, a heron's far flight to a roost somewhere, the twitter of kildees keen in the air, the noise of a wagon that jolts through the gloam on the last load home. There are lights in the windows, a blue spire of smoke climbs from the grange grove of elm and oak. The smell of the earth, where the night pours to her its dewy libation, is sweeter than myrrh. And in incense to toil is the smell of the loam on the last load home.
Please join me in reading the words for the extinguishing of our chalice flame. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.